In this video, we're going to go over the Chapter 5 work. So, if you'd like to follow along, open up the file chapter5work.xlsx from Canvas. Chapter 5 has a whole bunch of stuff in it. The first thing that we're going to go over is template files. So there are two big things about template files. The first thing about template files is when you go to File and you go to New, you're going to notice down below that there are all these different options available. Sometimes you don't even look at it. What's really nice about template files is if you want to create something, let's say for example a sales invoice or a calendar or a workout log, the chances are that somebody's already done it and they've done it better than you and they've made it available for free, so why not use it? So for example, I frequently do side jobs and they ask me to invoice, and I'll use either the blue invoice or the simple invoice as opposed to spending a lot of time creating one. So let's say for example that you wanted a workout log. You could look at workout log and we can take a look, and there's a workout log, and all you have to do is click it and then click create, and we have our new workout log. So if your boss ever asks you for a calendar or an invoice, don't spend hours creating it. Somebody's already done it. Now, the second thing about a template file, which your book doesn't really talk about, is you can actually click File and Save As. Here it's Save a Copy. Now notice when I click Save a Copy, I can change the name, I can change the location, but I can also change the type. So I could save this as a PDF, or I can save it as a CSV. I can save it as a macro-enabled workbook. We're going to talk about macros later this semester. But one of the things that I can save it as is an Excel template. I'm not going to do it for this file because we're going to be using it for something else in a moment. But there are two advantages to saving something as an Excel template file. First of all, whenever you go to File and then New, you will see it under your personal templates. So right there, notice I have a tax calculation workbook and a couple of personal process costing templates. So you'd always see it right there. You don't have to go hunting for it. But another thing about a template file is that when it opens, it gives it a brand new name. So very quickly, let's say I want to create a new syllabus for next semester, and I open this semester's syllabus and I start to change the title and I start to change the dates, and then I absent-mindedly click Save. What happens is my old syllabus doesn't exist anymore. I've just saved over it. When you open a template file, it gives it a new name, so you actually cannot destroy the template file. So you could use the same calendar over and over again, or the same workout log over and over again, and not save it. All right? The next thing that we are going to talk about in this video is view options. So notice over here I have an entire view menu. I can look at different workbook views, so I can take a look at page break preview. We're going to talk about that a little later when we do printing. We can also do page layout view and different views. We can do different things. We can not show the grid lines if that's what we want. That always kind of freaks me out. But you can not show the formula bar or not show your headings. You can zoom in here, but it's actually this window group that I wanted to talk about. So first, freeze panes is very useful. So let's say your assignments go past this window, let's say to column BQ. Now, once I start moving to the right, I can't see your names anymore. So do I have to scroll back? Is Adam on line 17? So what I can do is I can freeze the first column. So notice I have a button over here when I click on View and in Window. I have a button to freeze panes. And one thing I can do is freeze the first column. So I'd see everybody's first name, but not their last name. Notice if I keep going down, I lose the header, so I don't know which column is which. So I can actually freeze the top row. That wouldn't work in this case because we just freeze Aerospace Travel Company because that is row 1. But there's also a freeze panes. So freeze panes will freeze everything to the left and above the current cursor. So if I click in cell C6 and I click freeze panes and then freeze panes, you can see the lines that I have down below row 5 and between column B and C. And notice that no matter how far down I scroll, I still see my titles. And no matter how far to the right I scroll, I still see my names. And if you want to get rid of it, just go to freeze panes and unfreeze panes, and it goes back to normal. Another thing that you could do is you could see different parts of the worksheet at the same time. So if I click New Window, and then I go back to View, and then Arrange All, I always do the default tiled because I always mess up between horizontal and vertical. It always comes out different than what I expect, and Cascade is just strange. And I click OK. Notice now I have 2 different windows of the same workbook. So I could actually look at different sheets at the same time, or I could look at the same sheet, but different parts of the sheet, if that is what I want to do. And to get out of that, I just close one window, and I'll just maximize my other one. That's about it in the view. The next one they want us to go through is sort and filter. So in order to sort and filter, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a copy of this worksheet. I should have done that already, but I spent a lot of time playing with this because I didn't like some of the examples that they gave. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this worksheet. There are 2 ways that I can do it. I can hold down the Control key on my keyboard and then hold down the Sheet tab name. Notice that I have a plus sign and move it to the right. Another way that I can do it is click the sheet name, right click, choose Move or Copy. I can move it wherever I want, but I would make sure to do Create a Copy, and that would do the same thing. So now I have 2 different copies. Now this is a bad thing over here, that I actually have a line in between the header over here and the data, which is going to cause a little bit of a problem. One of the reasons why that I wanted to change the sheet. So if I could sort this, but in certain cases I'd have to tell the computer that there's no header. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select line 6, and I'm going to delete line 6, and we're just going to go through different sort options. So let's say I wanted to sort this list by first name. All I would do is click any first name. Do not select the column. This is very bad in a sort. The way I explain this to my data analytics students is if you choose column A and you do a sort, what's going to happen is your grade is going to be associated with somebody else if I did that in your grade listing. So you have to make sure to maintain the integrity of the list. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click any first name. Do not select the column. Now there are several ways that I can sort. I can click the Data tab. Notice I have an entire sort and filter group, and I can sort from A to Z. Or I can go to the Home tab. In the Editing group, I have a large monitor. You may just be able to see the icon, but notice I have a sort and filter, and I can get to the same places: sort A to Z, Z to A, and custom sort. So I'm going to go to the Data tab, and I'm just going to click the Sort A to Z. Notice how I kept my headers Sometimes what happens is if you have a row in between the headers and the data, it will take the first row of the data as a header and will actually sort the first row, which is why I deleted the row 6, so we had headers and then we have data after that. If I want to sort from Z to A by some other, so if I wanted to do it by location, I would just click any location. Remember, do not select the column, very bad. Select any location name, and now I can sort C to A, and notice now first I have Vancouver and then Toronto. You could do successive sorts. So I could sort by last name and then by location. So in order to do that, I'm going to click any cell on the list. In the data, I'm going to click the sort button, or if I was home in that editing group, sort and filter, get to the same place, custom sort. So I'm going to click the sort. Notice how it selects the entire list for me. And notice the button, my data has headers, so that button is checked automatically. So if you didn't think about it and there was that line in between 6 and 7, what would happen is it wouldn't sort your first line of data, it would take it as the headers. So first I'm going to sort by last name, and that one I would like to sort A to Z. And then notice I'm going to click now add a level. Notice it says then by, and then by I'm going to sort by location. And that one I'll sort Z to A, and I'm going to click OK. So I've sorted first by last name, and if they have the same last name, it's going to sort by location. Now let's go into the filter. With a filter, what you're going to do is you're going to display items from your list that meet certain criteria. Another reason why I had to delete that line 6, if I did not delete that line 6, then the filter would not work. So in order to filter, I'm going to select any cell. I'm not going to select the entire table, but I'm going to select any cell, and from that data tab, I can choose filter, or once again, if I'm home, I have sort and filter, and I can choose that filter icon. But I'm going to go to data, because I also wanted to show you the advanced filter as well. So first we're going to click the filter icon. So notice now I have little down arrows in all of the headers. So once again, that filter would not work if there was a line between the data and the header. You have to make sure that your worksheet is in the correct orientation. So now, let's say that I'm only interested in the administration department. So now, within the department, I can click the down arrow from the department header. I can click the select all, which will unselect everything. And now I just choose administration and click OK. And now notice it's only selected the administration. Notice every title has down arrows, but the department has a little filter icon. We can even do successive filters. So for example, if I'm only interested in the administration department in Miami, I can now click the down arrow for the location, click the select all, and choose Miami, and click OK. And notice from each down arrow I can also sort by that header as well. Now to get rid of the sort, I could go to each successive sort and click down and clear the filter from location if I wanted to go back, or I could go into the filter group, making sure that you're in the data, and I can click clear, and all my data comes back. And then to get rid of the little down arrows, you're just going to unclick the filter icon. Now, just to show you quickly the advanced filter, so those of you who are advanced in Excel, one of the problem is when I apply the filter is it's very difficult to cut and paste because all it's doing is hiding cells, and then if I have other things to the right, it can destroy the orientation. So I can actually use the advanced filter to extract my data. So if, let's say, for example, that I was only interested in the data from the administration department, I would have my list, then I'm going to have my criteria area, and then I'm going to have my output area. So in my criteria area, I'm just going to write criteria so you know what I'm doing. I'm just going to copy the header that I want. It's very important to copy because if it's not the exact same header, it won't be able to match. So I'm only interested in the administration department. So I'm going to copy department. I'm going to paste it under criteria. I'll make column P a little bit wider. And then under department, since I'm only interested in administration, I would write administration. I have to make sure that I spell it correctly, otherwise I won't get any output. And then unfortunately, the criteria can be in a different worksheet, but the output area cannot be. So I'm going to set my output area just on the side on the same worksheet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Data. Well, actually, before I do that, I'm going to click any cell in the list. I'm going to click the Data tab, and I'm going to click Advanced. So notice when I click the Advanced, it selected the entire list. So I'm going to tell it not to filter the list in place, but I'm going to tell it to copy it to another location. So it already has my list range. Now in the criteria range, I'm going to select department and administration. And then in my copy to, I'm going to skip a line because I am going to need my headers. I should have already copied them, but I'm not going to waste time. In my copy to, I'm just going to click cell P12 to under my output area. And now I'm just going to click OK. And it actually did copy my titles. And notice how I only have records from the administration department. So now, unlike using the filter, these are just records. I can actually copy them, I can cut them, I can paste them other places, which would be very, very difficult with the regular filter. Okay, we've gone over a lot so far, but the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at if, and I'm also going to add a new one, IFS. I call it ifs, but my husband calls it IFS, so whichever one you want to use. So in order to demonstrate IFS, I thought their example was a little complicated. So I'm going to use an example of a grading sheet. So I'm going to click the tab right now that says IFS, and we just have a list. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing. We just have a list of student ID, their status, and I deleted most of the data because we didn't need a lot of data. So first, to demonstrate an if statement, I'm going to calculate the average for each student. Oh, not averager, but average for each student by just typing equals average, opening the parentheses, selecting the 5 tests for the first student, closing the parentheses, hitting enter, clicking back on cell H2, and double-clicking the fill handle. Now I've calculated the average for each student. Now let's say this was a pass-fail. And let's say this was 400 students in a large lecture. I could tell Excel to put in the words pass and fail, or if I wanted P and F, either one. So right now I'm going to tell Excel to test each student's average. So I'm going to tell it to first test H2 and then H3. Using the if statement, I'm going to tell Excel that if their average is 60 and above, they will pass. In fact, for this exercise, let's make it 70 and above. Let's assume that this is graduate school and they need a 70 to pass. And if their average is below 70, they're going to fail. So I'm going to click in cell I2, the place where I want the first pass fail. And I'm going to click on Formulas, Logical, and If. So my logical test, I'm going to ask if H2 is greater than, so that is shift, comma, and then greater than or equals to, just add an equal sign, and then I'm going to type the number 60. I decided 70, excuse me, 70. Notice how it says that's true. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell Excel what to do if that statement is true, and then optional, what to do if that statement is false. Well, if it's true, I want it to write the word pass. So if I wanted to write a word or a phrase, I have to put it in double quotes. A formula would not have to be in double quotes. I'm going to show you a more complicated example in a moment where we do use a formula. But value of true, double quote, pass, close the double quote. Value of false, double quote, fail, close the double quote. So notice it gives you the answer for the first one to kind of guess if you're correct. I'm going to click OK. And now double click. And let's see if we can find somebody. It looks like everybody passed. So that was not a good example. Let's say in this example that you need an 80 to pass instead of 70. So I'm going to change that to 80 and recopy that. And we can see now that we do have people who are below an 80 who will fail the class. Now to demonstrate IFS. With IFS, I can tell Excel if situation A happens, do this. If situation B happens, do this. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention first about this if statement, I could have asked if H2 was less than 80. But in that case, I would have had to put fail first, because if H2 less than 80 is true, I would want it to do fail. So notice if H2 is greater than or equal to 80, I'm telling it what to do if that statement is true first, and then what to do if it's false. So let's say I wanted Excel to give letter grades. So let's say if their average is over 90, they get an A. If their average is over 80, they get a B. If their average is over 70, they get a C. And below that, they're going to get an F. We know that nobody has below 70 in this case. I can actually use IFS. So I'm going to click now I'll type grade in cell J1, and in cell J2, I'm going to click Formulas, Logical, and IFS. So now realize that I have to start from the top down, because Excel will only go to logical test 2 if logical test 1 is false. So for example, if I start off, is the grade over 70, all the grades are going to be over 70, so it won't go on to test if it's over 80 or 90. So the first logical test 1, I'm going to ask if H2 is greater than or equal to 90. If that is true, so I'm going to click if value of true 1, I would like the student to get an A. So I'm going to type double quote, then the letter A, and then close the double quote. Now, if the student has over a 90, it will stop right there. It won't go to logical test 2. But if logical test 1 is false, then it will move on to logical test 2. So then I'm going to ask Excel if that student's grade is greater than or equal to 80. If that is true, that student is going to get a B. So double quote B and close the double quote. Notice how this student gets a B, which is true. Now, if that statement is false, I move on to logical test 3. Notice you have a lot of logical tests that you can perform, 127. I'm not going to do that. But logical test 3, we're going to ask if H2 is greater than or equal to 70. I'm going to use the scroll bar on the side. If that is true, that student is going to get a C. And unfortunately, with IF, with if, you can tell Excel what to do if the test is false. The drawback here is you can't tell Excel what to do if it's false. So if I stopped right here and I got a grade of 50, I would get an error on this message. So for the last test, I'm going to ask Excel if H2 is less than 70. And if that is true, there should be an F. So that should take care of all of the possibilities. You can't get over 100. You can't get less than a 0. So I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to test each one. And I'm going to hide column I. So to hide, I'm going to first select all of column I, then right-click and choose Hide, just so we can see. And notice 70 is a C, 70 is a C, 80 is a B, 90 is an A, 70 is a C, so it does actually look like the grade has been done correctly. Oh, this is getting to be a long video, a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. Now I'm going to click on Sort Filter If Validation. It should be print number 2, the one that was not bothered by all of our sorts. And now I'm going to teach you a little bit of data validation. So with data validation, if you want somebody to enter a date, you can force them to enter a date. So for example here, let's say I wanted somebody to enter the date. I can click over here in cell P5 and I can go to Data. In my Data Tools, notice there's a button for data validation. Again, you may just see the icon. I have a very big monitor right now. And I'm going to go to Data Validation and I'm going to click Data Validation. So in the settings, instead of allow any value, I'm only going to allow a date. And I can do any date or a start date and an end date. Oh, it does say a start date and an end date. So my start date, let's say, would be 1/1/2020, and my end date 12/31/2022. And I'm going to click OK. Oh, I did not want to do that. I'm going to go back to my data validation. Now I have my settings, but I wanted to show the input message. So the input message, I could just say, please input a valid date. And you can also change the error alert and give an error message. Make sure you enter a date. So now I'm going to click OK. Notice how when the cell is selected, please input a valid date. That's my input message. So now I can enter a date. And, oh, I typed a 0 instead of a 3. So notice I did not accept it as a date. So I'm going to try again. 3/5/2021. And that it will allow me to do. Now I want to move on a little bit further, and I want to show you something cool with Vlookup, XLOOKUP, and data validation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these 2 columns because I don't want the data validation at all. So let's say that you wanted to do a little lookup thing for your boss. So let's say that you wanted your boss to be able to look up the employee ID after your boss looks up the employee ID, it'll automatically return the location, actually, instead of location, let's do department. I think it will be better, department. And also, I don't care about the headers very much right now, and also the last name. So for department, I'm going to demonstrate Vlookup, but Vlookup is actually old-fashioned. I'd actually like to demonstrate the XLOOKUP. So for department, I'm going to use Vlookup, and for last name, I'm going to use XLOOKUP. So let's say you want your boss to enter a particular employee ID, and you want it to return the department. Using Vlookup, I would click in cell P6, I would click Formulas, Lookup and Reference, and scroll down to Vlookup. But once again, Vlookup is very old-fashioned. If you have XLOOKUP, it's so much better, and I'll demonstrate XLOOKUP in a moment. So for Vlookup, the first thing that it's going to want is the lookup value. That is going to be the employee ID that the boss types in. That is going to be cell 06. Now for my table array, my lookup value has to be in the leftmost column. So employee ID has to be in the leftmost column. So I have to select the range C3 all the way down to H64 as far as this list goes. And I'm going to scroll up. Since I'm not copying it, I don't have to worry about the dollar signs, but if I was copying this, I'd have to use the dollar signs. Now, since I want the department, notice we can see the marquee right now. So relative to the list that's inside the marquee, department is in column 3. I know it's column 5, column E, but right now relative to what's been selected in the table array, the department is going to be in column 3. So in column index number, I'm going to type the number 3. And then what's super important with the Vlookup is to type the word false at the bottom in the range lookup. The best way I can explain the false is that Excel is lazy. If you don't type false, it'll look partway through the list and find a close match. When you say false, you're telling Excel, don't be lazy, find an exact match. So I'm going to click OK, and we will test this right now. So let's say I type in the second employee ID, 14155. It should return sales. And it did. It returned sales. Now, let's say I wanted to return the last name. That would be very, very difficult with a Vlookup because my table array would be here. My last name would be outside the table array. So because the lookup value would have to be in the leftmost column, I would have to copy the left name over to the right or do other things, which would be very difficult. With an XLOOKUP, I'm just going to say, okay, find the number in here and then return the one from here, which is in the same position. So instead of giving it the table array, I just give it a lookup vector and a result vector. A vector only has one dimension, right? Array has 2 dimensions. So a vector would only be one column or one row, where an array has tables and rows. So to return the last name, I'm going to click in cell Q6, Formulas, Lookup and Reference, and this time I'm going to go to XLOOKUP. So my lookup value is going to be the employee ID 06. Once I give the employee ID, I'm going to go to the lookup array. The lookup array is going to be column C, the employee ID. Now I get the return array, so I'm going to scroll up. For the return array, it's going to be the last name. So once again, if it's the third one in column C, it will return the third one in column B. If it's the eighth one in column C, it will return the eighth one in column B. Now another nice thing about XLOOKUP is with Vlookup, if it doesn't find it, you get an error. So a lot of people put it inside an if error. So with an if error function, if you get an error, you can tell it to display the number 0 or the word false or whatever it is instead of just getting an error. Here, you can say if not found, you could tell it to say not found or put in the number 0 or whatever it is. And the other nice thing about this is, as you scroll down, the default is that it's the exact match. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. So the default is the exact match, so you have to go into search mode, right, to tell it to do something else. So I'm done here. Once again, all I have to do is put in the lookup value, the lookup array, the return array, and I know we're going to find it, but actually I'm going to demonstrate one that's not found. So let me put if not found, I'll just put in false. And I'm going to click OK. And notice how now we have the last name Cutler. Now to demonstrate what I'm supposed to demonstrate here, which is the data validation. Now, what happens if my boss types in a bad employee ID? So types in 585-123-479, which isn't valid, and notice how I get an error message and I get a false, and your boss is going to come to you and say, it didn't work. And you say, yes, it did work, you just didn't choose a valid employee ID. So I can use data validation to have my boss choose from a list. So I'm going to click in cell 06. I'm going to click Data. In the Data Tools group, I'm going to click Data Validation. I can just click the button for Data Validation. If I click the down arrow, I'm going to choose Data Validation. I'm going to go back to the Settings tab, and this time, instead of allowing any value, I'm going to tell it to choose a list. And in the list, notice it asks for a source. I'm going to click in the source, and I'm going to select all of the employee IDs. Now watch how cool this is. Once I click OK, my boss has a nice little application where all the boss has to do is choose an employee ID, and it will actually return the department and the person's last name. So notice if I click on that cell, I get a list, so it makes it much more difficult to put in invalid data. This video is already very long, but there are only 2 more things that we're supposed to go through. The first one is printing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. And then the last one is tables. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that as well, because I actually do not like tables very much. So first, for printing. Let's say you wanted to print. I don't understand why you would want to print, or maybe you might want to print to a PDF or something like that. So I'm going to click first to go back to the Home tab. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the Page Layout tab. This gets everything ready to print. Now the best thing that I can tell you for printing is this little page setup group. If you click this little down arrow on the bottom right hand corner for page setup, basically everything that you need is there. So notice I have print preview, and I have options. Now before I go into that, I'd also like to show you that if you go into File and you click Print, you kind of get a print preview. But if I cancel, if I go back, what's going to happen is now I'm going to see all of my dotted lines which show me my page break. So once I go into the print for the first time, I can actually physically see my page breaks. They're not going to print, but of course that is where the page is going to break. So if I go back to page layout and I click that little down arrow over here, I can start playing with it. So notice I'm on the page. I can change the orientation to landscape or back to portrait. I can click the fit to 1 page wide by 1 page tall, but that is very dangerous. I've had students print me out work that's illegible because there's so much on just 1 page, but you can change the number of pages wide and also the number of pages tall if you want. Over here you can adjust the margins. I wouldn't suggest doing that. You can do headers and footers if that's what you want right from here. The book talks a little bit, headers and footers, you can read about those. But a neat thing is over here with the sheet, you can not only set a particular print area, but you can repeat rows at top. So for example, this data would print over a couple of pages. I could tell it to print row 5 at the top of every page, so we'd get the column headers for the first name, last name, and all of that. Now the last thing that I want to show you before we move on to the last thing, which is tables, only a minute. I'm going to click cancel here. Page break preview is really cool. So if you click the view tab, you can't really get there from here. If you click the view tab and you click page break preview, you can actually drag your page breaks to where you want them to be. So the dark lines are hard page breaks. Those are the ones that you set. And the dotted lines are ones that are set by the computer. And you can basically drag it wherever you want. Okay, we're at 41 minutes. Last topic. I'm going to click the table tab here. And I'm just going to show you how to turn this into a table, although I do not like it. Using tables got me into trouble at a conference, so I don't like to do it. So to insert a table, I click any cell within the list, don't select the table, and I'm going to click Insert and then Table, not Pivot Table, but just Table. So notice it selected the data automatically. The My Table has headers is very important. Tables don't work well without headers. And I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to click over here, Not Now. But notice there's a whole bunch of things that I could do. So I could very easily add a total row at the bottom. So notice it totals up. Test 5 automatically. I can add things in at the end of the table. So if I wanted to create an average, and I wanted to do my average, notice it automatically becomes a part of the table. And there's all sorts of different table calculations as well. So notice when I did the average, I didn't even have to use the fill handle because it knows that the average goes down the entire table. So at almost 44 minutes, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please watch the video because this week, instead of doing Excel, we're going to be working on QuickBooks, but I do want you to get the Excel knowledge.